"She's kidnapping me!" The little girl screamed at the millionaire as she was dragged through the airport by a woman. The millionaire then decided to take action, and minutes later, 100 squad cars surrounded the airport. Rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The scream cut through the humid afternoon air like a blade, echoing through the cobblestone streets of the small historic town at exactly 3 in the afternoon. The widowed businessman, 52 years old, almost dropped his coffee cup as he stepped away from the window of his luxurious apartment. It was always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity. For 3 weeks in a row, that sound had been coming from the Victorian house across the street, a faded yellow 2-story building with peeling blue shutters that contrasted sharply with the elegance of the modern building where he lived. As the owner of one of the largest construction companies in the region, accustomed to solving complex problems with his vast wealth built over decades, he preferred to stay away from other people's dramas, especially after 5 years of living alone. Ever since he lost his wife on a rainy night, he preferred not to remember. His investments in the stock market had thrived even during his grief, transforming his pain into an obsession with work that multiplied his fortune impressively. Across the street, inside the Victorian house, the 4-year-old girl huddled in the corner of the kitchen, too young to understand why her aunt hated her so much. The 38-year-old woman tightly held a metal spoon that she had heated on the gas stove, her eyes red from alcohol, fixed on the child trembling before her. "You're a curse on this house," the aunt hissed, her voice slurred from the booze she had been consuming since noon at the local dive bar. "Because of you, my sister is gone. Because of you, I lost everything." The spoon came down hard on the girl's small arm, leaving a red mark that would join the other scars that dotted her thin arms. The child bit her lip to avoid screaming any louder. She had learned that screams only enraged her Aunt more, who had worked at City Hall until she was fired for constant absences caused by her addiction. The girl closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's soft voice, singing that lullaby before bed. It was all that was left of her now, fragments of memories and a melody that insisted on echoing in her mind during the most painful moments. "Stop whining," the aunt grunted, putting the spoon away in the cupboard as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. "Go to your room, and I don't want to see you until tomorrow. And if you smear those filthy charcoals all over the walls again, you'll see what real punishment is." The child ran to the small room at the back of the house, a stuffy space with an old bed and a crucifix on the wall. There she curled up under the thin sheet and began to hum her mother's lullaby softly, the only thing that still comforted her. She didn't know that, across the street, someone had finally paid attention to that melody. The businessman stopped reviewing contracts when he heard the faint but distinct sound. He knew that song. His wife used to sing it when she cooked, a folk song about free birds. But where was it coming from? He approached the window again, his eyes scanning the facade of the Victorian house. One of the back windows was ajar, and that's where that childish voice was coming from, trembling but persistent. For the first time in 3 weeks, he felt something other than simple annoyance. There was something in that voice that struck a sensitive chord in his chest, something that reminded him of responsibilities long buried under layers of work and isolation. His stock portfolio continued to generate passive income, even as he stood still at the window. But for the first time in years, the money seemed less important than that fragile melody. Next door to the Victorian, the retired elementary school teacher, 61 years old, watered her begonias when she heard the girl's song. Unlike the businessman, she could no longer ignore the signs. During her 40 years teaching elementary school, she had developed a sixth sense for children in distress, and that voice carried a pain that made her heart clench. The educator dried her hands on her apron and made a decision. The next morning, she would pay a courtesy visit to her neighbor. It had been a long time since she had properly talked to the girl's aunt, and maybe it was time to get to know the little child better. The businessman remained at the window, an uncomfortable feeling growing in his chest. The music had stopped, but something in those few minutes had awakened memories that he preferred to keep dormant. Memories of a former employee who had abruptly resigned 5 years ago, a few months before the accident. She was a kind woman, always humming while organizing the construction company's files. Then, suddenly, she had simply disappeared from his life, leaving only a formal resignation letter and many unanswered questions. He had never thought of her again until he heard that familiar song echoing from a house where a child seemed to suffer in silence. His bitcoins and gold investments continued to appreciate automatically, but none of that mattered in the face of that disturbing realization that was beginning to form in his mind. The sun began to set over the mountains surrounding the town when the girl finally fell asleep, exhausted by pain and fear. Her little fingers tightened on the sheet, and in her dreams, she flew like the birds she secretly drew on the kitchen walls with pieces of charcoal found in the backyard. Across the street, the businessman closed the curtains and tried to get back to work, but he couldn't concentrate. Something had changed that afternoon, something he didn't fully understand yet. For the first time in years, he felt that maybe it was time to pay attention to what happened beyond his own windows. Night fell over the historic town, but the echo of that child's lullaby continued to resonate in the mind of a man who had spent 5 years running away from his responsibilities and a retired teacher who had never been able to ignore a child's suffering. The next morning brought with it the aroma of fresh bread from the local bakeries and the typical hustle and bustle of the historic town waking up for another day. The retired teacher put on her best floral dress and combed her grey hair with extra care. There was something in that child's voice that didn't leave her alone, an echo of hopelessness that she recognized from her years as an educator. At 9 o'clock sharp, she knocked on the door of the Victorian house. The sound echoed through the silent interior until shuffling footsteps approached. The girl's aunt opened the door with a puffy face and red eyes, clearly suffering the effects of last night's binge. "Good morning," said the teacher with her gentlest smile. "I came to pay a courtesy visit. It's been so long since we've had a proper conversation." The woman hesitated, running her hand through her disheveled hair. "Oh, Mrs. Henderson, it's not a good time. The house is a mess." "Nonsense, dear. We've been neighbors for so long." The educator stepped forward, forcing the aunt to back away. "And I would love to meet your niece. I hear she's an adorable little girl." The aunt's face hardened for an instant before forcing a weak smile. "The girl is sick. High fever. Better not to get close." At that moment a soft noise came from the kitchen, the sound of something being dragged on the floor. The teacher pricked up her ears, immediately recognizing the sound of a child trying to move silently. "Maybe I can help," the educator insisted. "I have experience with sick children. Raised 3 kids, you know how it is." "No need, no," the aunt replied quickly, blocking the entrance with her body. "I already took her to the doctor. It's just a cold. It'll pass soon." The teacher noticed the woman's nervous hands, the way she avoided eye contact, and especially the strong smell of alcohol emanating from her, even though it was so early. All the signs she had learned to recognize during decades dealing with troubled families. Across the street, the businessman watched the scene from his window while having breakfast. He had woken up earlier than usual, disturbed by confused dreams where a child's voice mixed with memories of his former employee. When he saw the teacher at the door of the Victorian house, a strange curiosity washed over him. The educator finally said goodbye to the aunt, but not before casting an investigative glance into the interior of the house. There was something deeply wrong there, and her experience told her that a child was suffering. As she walked back to her house, she decided that she needed to find a way to verify her suspicions. Inside the Victorian house, the aunt locked the door hard and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl crouched behind the table, trying to hide. The child had tried to reach a glass of water from the sink, but her height didn't allow it, and she had knocked over a chair in the process. "Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" the aunt growled, her irritation intensified by her hangover and the unexpected visit. "I was thirsty, Auntie," the girl murmured, her big eyes fixed on the floor. "Thirsty?" The woman laughed bitterly. "You want water? Then go get it in the backyard. And since you like making so much noise, you can stay out there until I decide you can come in." The child went out to the small backyard, a space surrounded by high walls and dominated by a single mango tree. There, she sat on the dirt and began to draw with a piece of charcoal that she had found near the gas stove. It was always birds, small, big, some flying, others perched on imaginary branches. Each stroke represented her dream of freedom, of flying away from that house where pain was her only constant companion. The hours passed slowly. The aunt had locked the back door, leaving the girl in the backyard under the hot midday sun. The child began to feel dizzy, but she knew that knocking on the door would only result in more punishment. So she began to hum her mother's lullaby softly, the melody being her only source of comfort. It was this melody that reached the businessman's ears again. This time he couldn't ignore it. There was something too familiar about that voice, about that specific song. He picked up his cell phone and, almost without thinking, began to record. He didn't know exactly why, but an instinct told him that he might need that evidence. While recording, fragments of memories began to fit together in his mind. His former employee hummed that same song while working. The woman who had been an exemplary employee until she disappeared abruptly. The woman who always spoke fondly about her little daughter, a girl named... The cell phone trembled in his hands when the realization hit him like a punch in the stomach. His former employee's daughter was called exactly as he vaguely remembered hearing. The child who was suffering in the house across the street was the daughter of the kind woman who had worked for him for 3 years before simply disappearing. How hadn't he made that connection before? The businessman put away his cell phone and began to pace back and forth in his apartment. He vaguely remembered the employee mentioning family problems, a sister she didn't get along with, financial difficulties. But he was so absorbed in his own problems at the time, the growing conflicts with his wife, the problems in the company, that he hadn't paid due attention. His dividends continued to arrive automatically, his investments generating constant profits. But all his accumulated wealth seemed insignificant in the face of this devastating discovery. Now, 5 years later, his ex-employee's daughter was across the street, and from the sounds coming from that house, she was not in a good situation. The guilt he carried for the loss of his wife multiplied, now including regret for not helping when she clearly needed it. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, punctually, the screams started again. This time, the businessman didn't step away from the window. He watched with growing horror as through the kitchen window of the Victorian house, he saw a female silhouette moving aggressively. He picked up his cell phone again and began to record, this time with more determination. What he saw through the cell phone screen made him nauseous. The aunt was holding something in her hands, it seemed to be a kitchen utensil, and gestured violently towards a small figure that he could barely distinguish. The girl's screams echoed through the afternoon, and this time he couldn't pretend they were just childish tantrums. When the silence returned, he remained at the window for a few more minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just witnessed something that would change everything. The question now was, what would he do with this information? His net worth allowed him to hire the best lawyers. His influential contacts could move mountains, but all this fortune built over decades seemed useless in the face of his emotional paralysis. That night, The girl slept on the floor of the backyard, where her aunt had left her as punishment for making too much noise during the afternoon. The child curled up in her own t-shirt and looked at the stars through the branches of the mango tree. In her 4-year-old mind, she made a silent wish to her mother, wherever she was, that someone, anyone, would take her away from that place of pain. Across the street, the businessman couldn't sleep, tormented by the certainty that he needed to act, but paralyzed by the same emotional inertia that had consumed him since his wife's departure. His cryptocurrency investments continued to appreciate while he remained immobile, unable to turn his fortune into action when it mattered most. 3 days had passed since the businessman discovered the child's identity, and guilt consumed him like a slow fire. During those days, he had systematically documented the episodes of violence, always at 3 in the afternoon, always with the same methodical brutality. His collection of videos and audios grew, but his courage to act remained paralyzed by the same cowardice that had haunted him since the night he lost his wife. On that Thursday morning, the retired teacher made a decision that would change the course of everything. She had spent the night awake, tormented by the certainty that a child was suffering a few feet from her house. Her 4 decades as an educator had taught her to recognize the signs, and they were all present in the Victorian house. She decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of attempting another direct visit to the girl's aunt, she opted for a more subtle strategy. At 7 in the morning, she positioned herself in the side yard of her house, the place where she had the best view of the backyard of the Victorian house. What she saw horrified her. The girl was sitting under the mango tree, completely alone, wearing only a torn t-shirt and panties. Her small arms were marked by obvious burns, some still red and inflamed. The child drew in the dirt with a piece of charcoal, creating shapes that the teacher recognized as birds. "Good heavens," the educator whispered, her hands trembling as she held onto the fence that separated the yards. It was worse than she imagined. Much worse. The girl looked up and saw the old woman watching her. For a moment, the two stared at each other, in silence. Then, to the teacher's surprise, the child smiled, a weak but genuine smile, and waved shyly. "Hi, Nana," said the girl with her tiny voice, using the affectionate term she gave to all elderly women. "Hi, sweetheart," replied the teacher, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Are you all right?" The child glanced quickly at the windows of the house before answering. "I'm fine. I'm just drawing birdies." "That's lovely. Do you like birds?" "I like them a lot. They can fly wherever they want," replied the girl, her big eyes shining with a sadness that broke the educator's heart. At that moment, the aunt's harsh voice echoed from inside the house. "Girl, where are you?" The terror that instantly took over the child's face said everything the teacher needed to know. The girl got up quickly, wiped her hands on her t-shirt, and ran into the house, but not before looking once more at the educator with an expression that screamed for help. The teacher remained in the yard for a few more minutes, processing what she had seen. The burns, the fear, the way the child reacted to the aunt's voice, everything confirmed her worst fears. She could no longer pretend that she didn't know what was happening. Meanwhile, across the street, the businessman had witnessed the entire interaction. Through his window, he could partially see the backyard, and the sight of the marks on the girl's arms made him sick. For the first time in 5 years, he felt a genuine rage burning in his chest. His former employee had trusted him in some way. Even if indirectly, even if he didn't know it at the time, she had left her daughter in the care of a family that lived in the same town where he lived. And now this child was being tortured while he watched from his comfortable window, paralyzed by his own cowardice. At 11 in the morning, the teacher made a courageous decision. She put on her best dress suit, took a tray of homemade cookies that she had prepared as a pretext, and headed back to the Victorian house. This time, she wouldn't take no for an answer. The aunt answered the door reluctantly, clearly irritated by the neighbor's insistence. Mrs. Henderson, I already told you it's not a good time. Honey, I brought some cookies I made yesterday, the educator interrupted firmly, and I insist on getting to know the little one better. As long-time neighbors, it's our duty to support each other. Before the aunt could protest, the teacher had already entered the house, using all the authority that decades of classroom experience had given her. The interior of the Victorian house was dark and smelled of mold mixed with alcohol. Old and poorly maintained furniture occupied the room, and there was a heavy atmosphere that made the air seem difficult to breathe. The girl is sleeping, the aunt lied, blocking the way to the back of the house. What a pity. Maybe another time then, said the teacher, but her experienced eyes had already catalogued several disturbing details. Dark stains on the kitchen floor that seemed to have been poorly cleaned, a metal spoon left on the stove, and especially small charcoal drawings on the walls that had clearly been made by a child. At that moment, a low sound came from the direction of the kitchen, a muffled sob, almost imperceptible. The teacher and the aunt froze. The silence that followed was tense and revealing. "It must be the neighbor's cat," the aunt said quickly, but her voice trembled slightly. The educator smiled and nodded, but had decided that she had seen enough. "Well, I'll let you rest then. But remember that I'm always here next door if you need anything. Anything at all." The teacher's tone made it clear that it wasn't just a casual offer of help. It was a subtle but direct warning. After the educator left, the aunt locked the door hard and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl curled up behind the gas stove, trying to hide. The child had cried when she heard the teacher's kind voice, remembering the kindness she had once known. "You were making noise," accused the aunt, her eyes already shining with familiar fury. "No, Auntie, I didn't make noise," protested the girl, but her small voice sounded weak even to her. The aunt picked up the metal spoon that was on the stove and placed it directly in the flame. The child recognized the ritual and began to tremble. She knew what was coming next. "You want to draw attention, don't you?" hissed the woman as the spoon heated up. "You want the neighbors to come here asking questions? Do you think I don't know how to take care of you?" Across the street, the businessman had positioned his cell phone on the window and was recording again. This time he managed to capture not only the sounds, but also partial images through the kitchen window. What he saw made him make a decision that would change everything. He could no longer be just a silent observer. His former employee had been a good person, a dedicated employee who always spoke of her daughter with love. That child was his responsibility now, whether he wanted it or not. His investment funds continued to generate compound interest automatically, but all this accumulated wealth was worth nothing if he continued to be a coward. While the girl suffered another episode of systematic torture, the businessman made a call that he hadn't made in months. He called his personal lawyer, an old college friend. "Robert, I need your help with a delicate situation," he said, watching through the window as the child's screams echoed through the afternoon. "It's about a child, and I think it could be a matter of life." The lawyer arrived at the apartment the next morning with a grave expression on his face. The two men had been classmates in college almost 3 decades ago, and the jurist knew well the emotional isolation that his friend had built after the loss of his wife. "I need you to tell me exactly what's going on," said the lawyer, sitting in the spacious living room of the apartment. "You talked about a child in danger, but I need details." The businessman served coffee and positioned himself next to the window, the place that had become his obsession in recent days. "The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine. She is being mistreated by the aunt who takes care of her." "Mistreated how?" asked the lawyer, taking a notepad from his briefcase. "Burns, daily screams, neglect." The businessman paused, struggling with the words. "I have recordings, evidence of what's happening." The jurist was silent for a moment, processing the information. "This is very serious. If you have evidence of child abuse, you need to contact Child Protective Services immediately." "I know," replied the businessman, running his hands over his face. "But there's something more. My ex-employee worked for me for 3 years. She left abruptly 5 years ago, a few months before my wife's accident. I never understood why, but now—" "Now you feel responsible," completed the lawyer, understanding the emotional complexity of the situation. The businessman nodded. "If I had paid more attention at the time, maybe I could have helped. Maybe she wouldn't have had to leave her daughter with that woman." At that moment, the familiar sound of screams echoed from the house across the street, even though it was only 9 in the morning. Both men turned to the window, and the lawyer could see the expression of anguish on his friend's face. "Does this happen every day?" he asked, horrified. "At 3 in the afternoon religiously?" "But sometimes at other times too," replied the businessman, picking up his cell phone. "Want to see the recordings?" The lawyer watched the videos in growing silence, his face paling with each scene. As a jurist specializing in family law, he had seen many cases of child abuse, but something in the systematization of that violence disturbed him deeply. "We can't wait any longer. I need you to give me all these recordings today. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services and the district attorney. That child needs to be removed from that house immediately." For the first time in weeks, the businessman felt a glimmer of hope. His fortune, built through years of hard work, could finally serve a truly important purpose, saving the daughter of the woman he had failed to protect years ago. While the two men planned the intervention across the street, the girl lived another day of terror. The aunt had woken up with a particularly severe hangover and discovered that there was no more alcohol in the house. Her irritation multiplied when she found new drawings of birds that the child had made on the kitchen wall during the early hours. "How many times do I have to tell you not to dirty the walls?" shouted the woman, holding the girl by the arm hard enough to leave marks. "You're a plague, a curse on this house." The child tried to explain, to say that she had dreamed of her mother and that the drawings made her feel less alone. But the words were lost in sobs. At 4 years old, she still didn't fully understand why her aunt hated her so much, why each day brought new pain. The lawyer was in a meeting at the district attorney's office when he received a call that would change everything. It was the retired teacher who had gotten his number through mutual acquaintances in the town. "Doctor, I know this may sound strange, but I need to talk about a child in danger," she said, her voice laden with urgency. "My neighbor, I'm absolutely sure that she is being mistreated." The jurist straightened in his chair. "Ma'am, does the child happen to live in a yellow Victorian house?" "Exactly. How did you know?" "I just received evidence about the same situation from another client," replied the lawyer, understanding that 2 independent sources confirmed the gravity of the case. "This changes everything. We can act today." It was thus that, by a coincidence that would change the girl's destiny, 2 simultaneous complaints reached the authorities on the same morning. The prosecutor, upon receiving the video evidence from the businessman and the detailed testimony of the teacher, determined an urgent intervention. At 2 in the afternoon, a coordinated operation was being set up. The social worker from Child Protective Services, accompanied by 2 colleagues and a bailiff, was heading to the Victorian house. The teacher had offered to accompany the team, using her experience with traumatized children. The businessman watched everything from his window, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, after days of paralysis, he had managed to act. His lawyer was by his side, both witnessing the moment that would change the girl's life forever. "You did the right thing," said the jurist, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. "I hope it's not too late," replied the businessman, his eyes fixed on the team approaching the Victorian house. Inside the house, the aunt had gone out to buy alcohol at the local bar, leaving the girl locked in the stuffy room. The child continued to sing softly, unaware that her life was about to change radically. When the social worker knocked on the door of the Victorian house and received no answer, she used her legal authority to enter the property. What they found inside surpassed even their worst expectations. A dirty and poorly maintained house, a strong smell of alcohol, and clear signs of neglect in every room. It was the teacher who first heard the faint voice coming from the room at the back. "There's someone here," she said, guiding the team through the corridor. When they opened the door to the room and found the girl curled up in the corner singing her sad song, everyone present felt a pang in their hearts. The child looked up with big, frightened eyes, not understanding who those people were or what they wanted from her. "Hi, sweetheart," said the social worker, crouching down to be at the child's height. "My name is Anna. We've come to help you." The girl looked at the teacher, recognizing the kind old woman who had talked to her in the backyard. A glimmer of hope shone in her eyes, but was quickly replaced by fear. "Auntie will be angry," she whispered. "You don't need to worry about that now," said the educator, reaching out her hand to the girl. "We're going to get out of here, okay?" And so, after months of silent suffering, the child was finally removed from the house where she had known only pain and fear. But the real twist was yet to come. At the police station, while the social worker filled out the necessary paperwork, she asked the girl routine questions about her family. It was then that the child, with her small but clear voice, revealed something that no one expected. "My mom worked at a big company with buildings," she said. "She always talked about a very good man who paid her right and who had a pretty wife. But then the good man's wife went away to heaven, and my mom was very sad for him." The businessman, who had arrived at the police station to give a statement, froze upon hearing these words. The social worker continued to ask questions, and the child, with the innocence of her 4 years, told more details that fit perfectly with his memories. "My mom said that the good man was very lonely after his wife went to heaven. She wanted to help him, but Auntie said that she couldn't work anymore because she had to take care of me." The revelation struck the businessman like lightning. His ex-employee hadn't simply abandoned her job. She had been forced by her sister to choose between work and taking care of her daughter. And when she chose her daughter, she became financially vulnerable, depending on her alcoholic sister, who had always despised her. "She talked about the good man until the day she went to heaven too," continued the girl, unknowingly revealing the connection that explained everything. "She said he had a lot of money but was sad, and that one day she would go back there to help him smile again." Tears began to run down the businessman's face. During all these years, he had thought that his employee had abandoned him when he needed her most, but the truth was that she had been forced to leave to protect her own daughter. And even so, she still thought of him fondly, still wanted to help him. The social worker noticed the man's emotion and asked the question that would change everything. "Did you know this child's mother?" "She was my employee," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. "One of the best people I've ever known, and I let her go without understanding what was happening." In the days that followed, the full truth was revealed. The girl's aunt, consumed by alcoholism and jealousy of her more successful sister, had emotionally blackmailed the child's mother, forcing her to choose between her job and her daughter. When the mother chose her daughter, she became financially dependent on her sister, who used this as an excuse to mistreat her until her premature passing. The businessman discovered that his former employee had died a few months after leaving her job, a victim of an illness that could have been treated if she had had the financial means for adequate medical care. The guilt he felt turned into an iron determination to honor her memory by taking care of her daughter, but the biggest twist was still reserved for the end. During a conversation with the girl, already temporarily installed in a foster home, she revealed something that her mother had told her before passing. "Mommy said that if she wasn't here anymore, I should look for the good man at the company. She said he would take care of me because he had a big heart, even though he was sad." The businessman then understood that his former employee had left a final request, a final demonstration of trust in him. She had instructed her daughter to look for him if something happened, believing that he would do the right thing. 6 months later, after a lengthy legal process, the girl was officially placed under the businessman's care. He had used part of his fortune not only to secure the best lawyers, but also to establish an educational fund for other children in similar situations. Mrs. Henderson became a constant presence in the child's life, offering the maternal affection that she so badly needed. Little by little, the girl began to smile again, her drawings of birds evolving from symbols of escape to representations of conquered freedom. The businessman discovered that taking care of his former employee's daughter not only honored her memory, but also healed the wounds left by the loss of his wife. For the first time in years, his house was filled with laughter again. His life had purpose beyond the accumulation of wealth. He used his resources to create a foundation that identified and helped children in at-risk situations, transforming his personal pain into a force for good. His investments continued to thrive, but now he understood that the true value of his fortune lay in how it could be used to protect the most vulnerable. The girl, now 5 years old, still sang the song that her mother had taught her, but it was no longer a song of suffering. It was a melody of hope, a bridge between the painful past and a future full of possibilities. And every night, when she drew her colorful birds on the walls of her new room, this time with crayons instead of charcoal, she whispered a thank you to her mother in heaven, knowing that her love had found a way to protect her even after she was gone. The man, who was once just a lonely businessman, had discovered that the greatest wealth anyone can have is not measured in dollars or assets, but in the ability to transform suffering into love, and love into hope for the future. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10. And thank you very much.